And as you all know, we're here this afternoon with two very, very special guests. Not only leaders in the profession for quite a few years, they're special people to Jim and I as they are our teachers. And so Jim is going to introduce Professor Clary, and I'll introduce Mr. Green before we get started here.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jim, and I'd like to welcome Rick Clary today. Rick was my teacher at Kentucky, and he was director of bands at the University of Kentucky for 10 years and is now the senior band conductor and professor of conducting at Florida State University. He's one of my mentors, and I credit for 90% of the music I have in brain was because sitting in one ensemble with him for 5 years and doing my master's with him. Just an incredible guy, incredible talent, and I still tell everyone the best musician I know. So welcome, Professor Clary.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
And I'm grateful. I think a lot of us here in the digital room right now know Mr. Green a little bit. He's been a frequent guest of ours here at Arkansas Tech and in the state of Arkansas for certainly my 5 years, and then for a time before that with Professor Cooper and Mr. Bright, and has a history of being involved with us here in Arkansas. So many of you know him and the incredible work he did with the All-State Band last February. So please welcome back, quote unquote, Mr. Green.
Good to be here, Dan. Thank you.
It's great to see you both. So we thought we'd ask a few questions today. The general topic was, kind of beyond the notes and rhythms. And I asked, kind of came up with that title because that was a conversation that Mr. Green and I had actually many years ago that I'm sure he doesn't really remember, but I do, because I came to do my master's degree after a few years as a public school band director. And I didn't know what a conducting lesson was going to be. I knew what a trombone lesson was kind of about that time, but I didn't know what a conducting lesson was going to be. And I had a pretty good high school band. We were fine. We played the right notes and the right rhythms. And Mr. Green said to me once early on, there's more to it than that. And I'm sure I said, oh, absolutely. And I had no idea what he was talking about, because that's just what you do. You say, sure, and you hang on for dear life. So we have to get into the score. We have to begin somewhere. So the first question for Mr. Green and Mr. Clary, and you guys can banter a little bit and find some rhythm interjecting here with each other, is when you get a new piece of music, when you get a new score, how do you start? When you have that document in front of you, you're going to open it up. What are the first steps?
Go ahead, Gary.
I'll wait for you.
Okay. Well, I'm inclined, because I'm ornery, to say my first step is to start procrastinating. But when I finally do reach that point where I'm time exposed, I have a process that I do, and this is all some sort of conglomeration of suggestions that I've heard from colleagues, older and contemporary, who've been in a situation at a conducting symposium or some other event, who've been asked a question like this. What do you do? And I think I have come down to the point where the first thing that I do is I try to read the score like a book. I try to take in as much information as I can that's printed on every page, with the understanding that some of that isn't going to be particularly relevant, but I don't want to miss anything. And I think that early in my career, I was probably more getting to the actual score and the issues therein. But it came to me through experience that I should probably start by reading everything the composer gives you, or at least that the publisher has allowed you to see. And so I literally just kind of read it like a book and take in impressions. And I look at things like any sort of, obviously anything that the composer has printed, about the creation of the work or its inspiration. I think that any sort of performance suggestions that come in the way of notes, any errata that barely made it onto the score when it was published, that you can take advantage of. I'm always interested in any unique instrumentation moves that you're going to find that I think a lot of people may not catch until they're neck deep into a problem and they suddenly realize that they don't have the instrument they need to hear that line in the score. I'm really looking for any kind of information that will get me closer to the document that I'm looking at. I make observations on score layout, which is, no matter what you say, not standard because of publishers again, and they're saving space. And so we get these kind of different chopped up versions, sometimes two systems on the same page, sometimes 43 staves on one page. And so I'm on the lookout for those places where the score look and its presentation can be a barrier. And I'm setting myself up to be prepared later on in study to be sure that I've got a safety net there and enough markings so that I don't get disoriented at any point along the process if I can help myself. But as I cruise into birthday number 63, I'm a lot easier to disorient. So I'm kind of on top of that stuff at this point. I think just about anything that I can see that seems non-standard. And to just not get my brain engaged in figuring out how I'm going to have to fix everything, but just what's there. What's there? You're on.
You are still a youngster.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah, it's absolutely everything that you say comes into play at some point in time, either at the beginning or it all comes around all the time that you're looking at a piece. The thing that I would caution you about for anybody who's listening, in the old days, I don't know if you guys know about this. When I was a kid, my mom used to bring home these paintings for us, and they were like paint by the numbers, and you had all the colors, and all you had to do was not cross the line, and then you had a painting. Well, that was easy to do, but it didn't turn out to be, in the long run, something that was aesthetically pleasing. It was just paint by the numbers, put the colors where they go, and then you have something. But it was easy to do. The more difficult thing is to take away the lines and envision the painting without it. What color do you want here? What color do you want there? And what is it that you're trying to achieve in the longest run? So as far as score study is concerned, Frank Kelly was at the university many years ago. And I asked Frank with my graduate students what he looked for in a conductor. And he looked at me and he said, I look for someone that finds something in my music that I don't know is there. And that was I looked at him and I said, well, you wrote it, man. So what are you looking for? And Frank is the kind of guy that wants the humanity to come out. He wants that to happen. And so Rick said earlier, he talked about the composer and trying to know the composer's intent. We hear the intent all the time. But to know the composer is a very, very important part of it. And it doesn't matter if the piece is worthy of your time to teach your students in your class, or for you to study at home without ever the possibility of conducting it, then the composer is the primary person and needs to have your complete attention. And so you do everything you can to find out about that person and why they wrote that music. For many of us now, it's easy just to pick up the phone or send an email, talk to the composer. And I would encourage that if it's at all possible, do it. Short of that, if it's someone that you can't talk to now because they're gone, they've left us, then the next best thing to do, in my mind, is to try to find out as much as you possibly can about the composer. Read about them, listen to other music that not necessarily band, could be whatever. It depends on what you're looking at. Talk to people, if it's possible, talk to people that knew them. What experiences did they have with that person that would cause them to have an opinion about how they feel like a score should be studied or how it should even be looked at. And I'm sure that later on we'll have a time to talk a little bit about a journey of trying to learn about what to bring out in a score and how that changes over the period of your life. The thing that's for me right now I'll leave it at this for now. There's more to. It's not okay if it's out of tune. It's not okay if it's not rhythmically correct. It's not okay if the techniques are not served properly, because if the techniques aren't served properly, then the music, the effect cannot come out. It cannot. So, but there's a humanity that you try to find, the poetry that the person is trying to bring forward in his music or her music. And I think we need to find that. I think, as a matter of fact, I think it's the most important. The musicality of it is, and the reason why it exists to begin with is the most important thing.
That's cool. I think that's probably a pretty good way to segue into the second question, which is then after those initial steps, how do you internalize that information? Do you play at the piano? Do you sing? Other ways of audiation when trying to move forward from those beginning steps?
Rick, you want to go or do you want me to?
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Since I never was able to get enough keyboard skills to really, be very helpful to me, except to arbiter isolated things that I suspected were wrong in the score. I've really had to be left up to my own devices to sing pretty much everything. And what I do to internalize stuff is I evaluate things like, how does this piece sing? How is it constructed? To what extent does it sing? How does it move or dance? How does it express itself in that way? How is it set up in phrases? Is it set up in phrases? We have a lot of music that's not really a part of the deal for the most part. And so I'm very interested in just basically going through and making observations about the look of the score, singing the lines, and try to get some sort of attachment to potential shapes and whatnot. Then, after that, I begin a pretty detailed preliminary marking of the score in a pretty systematic way. It's ones that I've routinely taught my students that were sort of grown from the kernel of information I got from Richard Strange when I was an undergraduate. And back then we were marking the scores with red wax pencils, and you had sort of left parentheses on stuff, and that served me very well in the start. But as I gained experience and got the sphere conductors, I started acquiring more techniques. And so, what it really comes down to is I go through in order how the piece is organized in meter and tempo schemes. And then I am going to be interested in tracing the lead voices as I can perceive them as printed in the score and how they're passed from place to place. I'm also interested in secondary lines that are clearly going to be important, but subsidiary to those. I'm very, very interested also, kind of early on in the process, is to identify what I call sort of composer black holes, which are places where they have elected to not use the baritone saxophone player for 3.5 minutes of the piece. And then suddenly, boom, without a cue, hello, it's your time, you know? And so I'm kind of debugging the score a little bit in that way. Let's see, what else do I got here? I think there's secondary voice. I think that's kind of it. By the time I go through and deal with other factors like dynamic schemes, and you know, all the basic building blocks, component parts of how you basically take a piece apart like that and put them back together, then I'm usually in a position to feel like I can comfortably begin working on the piece with my group. Because I think I've debugged as many things as I know to that point. I'm always trying to internalize things. I'm an absolute addicted music listener. I don't turn down a recording to listen to music. Many of my friends for decades have, you know, sworn that I must listen to music 24/7, 365, and I think that's probably mostly true. So I've got this kind of idea about all this music that I've absorbed and taken on as responsibility, and I feel by the time I go through those things, it's kind of go time, and then a lot of it has to do with the interaction between what I'm bringing to it and what the players bring back.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Hey, Rick, can I ask you a quick follow-up before you answer Gary? So,
Sure.
so how do you know, for all the band directors listening, we have a lot of students on here too. How do you know, you're both incredibly gifted at pulling music off the page, finding those elements that maybe are missed or something a composer doesn't hear. How do you know when you're there? How do you know when you've reached that musical moment between you and the players? How do you know that that's internalized with the whole ensemble for all those band directors listening?
Well, I don't know it's that simple, but I think the answer for me is in my work, going really all the way back to when I was trying to figure stuff out as a high school band director. And thank God had one Gary Green come into my life and be the first person that really, aside from my mentors at home, who were actually in a position to tell me something I didn't already know about my band. And so I think what goes on that I've learned is that it's a process of finding these things in the score, even if you don't find them initially, that it becomes clear in the process that, you know what, this is more important than I thought it was. And then I draw the player's attention to that. But my whole system is rather based on taking a large group of players. My usual standard kit at home is like 52 bodies, and turning that into a chamber ensemble and making it possible to have clear enough textures and balance schemes so that everyone in the room has a fair shot to hear more of what's actually going on and to be able to react. So that's the best answer. But a lot of it just has to do with musical intuition. Mm-hmm. And there's just so little expressive information in the parts, and even in the score. That's something that you do stuff and trying to put together how it expresses itself. And then you just have to make that a priority, I think.
Sure. Gary?
Yeah. You know, it's like, I try seeing everything on the page, everything. Whether there could be a blemish on the page, I'll inspect it and try to find a way to audiate it somehow in my outward surrounding rather than internally. sometimes that's successful, sometimes not. I was never a very good singer, so nobody would want to be around when I was doing that. But it was a way to examine it. At least it would draw my attention to something. I have to. Years ago, I asked David Maslenka to write a piece for me. I'm not sure that I really knew what I was getting myself into when I did it. I asked him for a piece about 20 minutes long of moderate difficulty. I was teaching at the University of Connecticut at the time. And he sent me Symphony No. 3, which is an hour long and so difficult, nobody can play it. And so I got the score, and there were 5 movements to the symphony. And I got the first movement, he sent me the 3rd movement first for some reason. I really don't know why. And so I asked him, it was no doubt a phone call. I don't recall then whether the internet was certainly not as active as it is now. And we just didn't have the communication capable at that time. That's why I have so many letters from him. But I asked him where the parts were. And he said, well, you have to generate the parts. You have to commission somebody to write them. Well, I'd spent all the money I had on the commission, and I had no money for parts. So I wrote every part to that hour-long symphony of David Maslenka's. The first clarinet part alone was over 25 pages. And you can imagine what the calligraphy looked like. Now, you would think that if I went to that kind of detail to get inside a score and write everything from the first piccolo to the last percussion, that I would know very well every part in that score. Not so. I knew how the first clarinet sounded, or what the part looked like, and I knew what it entailed, but I had no idea how the first clarinet part related to the 3rd trumpet. I had spent all that time thinking that I would just automatically ingest this. It doesn't happen. We do phrasal analysis with the kids at the school. We do all kinds of things to try to get the music from the page into the person who's responsible for the interpretation. But at the end of the day, all that information that you're gathering in your life from station 1 to station wherever I am now, everything changes. And you learn how I'm at a place, there was always an excitement when I would get a new score. If I got a new score from Michael Kograss or got a new score from David Maslenka, I was so excited. But it got to the point where I'd look at them and I could see their signature in it. And so that helped. Sometimes if I got a new one, my first commission from Mason Bates was difficult because I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand how he spoke. So you have to get to know how people write, and you'll get to the point where you can see things just by opening up the score and looking at it. And there are all kinds of tricks, all kinds. I used to mark all my scores. I still would mark my score. I don't ever conduct from a score that's marked unless it's Stravinsky. But other than that, I don't use a marked score to conduct from. But I do use scores. I used to not believe that marking scores was a good thing until I went to Carnegie Hall with Chris Rouse, and in the dressing room was a score page of Mahler's with red marks all over it. So I thought, well, it's good enough for him. It's okay for me too. But early on, it's just try to know the composer, audiate as much as you possibly can, and stay long time with that music, long time. That's
Thank
enough.
you. Yeah. The next question, Jim's follow-up may have gotten us here, but I want to mention it anyway since we sent you the questions in advance. I think we may have covered a lot of this, but if you have anything else to add, we can certainly do that. The question was, in terms of phrasing, how do you determine what is what is correct, what is right. And again, I think we might have just organically gotten to a lot of that, but if there's anything else you want to add, please do so, or we can just move on to the next question.
I'll do a real short, quick answer. It's not an answer at all, it's a comment. Everything that I hear musically has come to me from other people through many venues in this society now. And as I've taken this in, it's my impression of an external world, but it becomes my musical sound inside of me. And so when it comes out of me, it's because of all these things that have been part of it. But I struggle to make what I hear, what's inside of me, what's been given me, what I try to give back of that person. But it's not just something, I think there is intuition, but intuition comes from a lot of different places. But that is definitely part of it.
Yeah, I also have an addendum to that. At some point, I early on when I was first in the sphere of Bob Reynolds, he laid a term on me from Maurice Abravanel, who built the Utah Symphony. He was one of the world's greatest composers, and he just decided at one point that he was going to take the Utah Symphony job and build something there and not be an international phenomenon. But the term that Bob passed on was informed intuition. And I immediately held on to that and have talked with all of my students about this. And the facts are what Gary's just said: everything comes to you in its time. You seek things out. I think people think of intuition as, acuity that is somehow you're born with. I don't really believe that. I think only the people at the highest levels of acuity can assemble what feels like intuition faster than other people, experiential knowledge. And I'm remembering that my very first high school band that I conducted in West Phoenix was heard by Sir David Whitwell at the State Concert Festival, an event that the group didn't even know existed before I got there in the summer. And he heard the group, and I listened to the tape in my underwear the day after the festival, kind of waiting to hear the bad news because he was a legendary baby eater back then. And I was just expecting it to not go well. And he said, the message on the tape all of a sudden on the adjudication tape was, if there are students in the room, please turn off the tape recorder now. The following comments are for the director only. And of course, I had a complete hemorrhage, thinking, oh my God, here it is. But he was really very kind. And he was very positive, and his big message was, to condense here because we don't have too much time, is that he recognized what I brought to this and appreciated it, although he refused when informed that I learned most of that from Richard Strange. He disavowed that Richard Strange had anything to do with me at that point. But he said, you need to learn the great music of the world. Don't even bother really so much with the band music. And he listed off all of the 5-star composers in the 19th and 20th centuries, and said, I recommend that you buy Dover scores and buy recordings, and you study the great music. If you do that, with what I see in you, John Zedeklik will have no mysteries for you. And I had just, suffered through a performance of Crowell and Shaker Dance that, held its water and everything. But he had some marvelous comments about that in his critique. But I've never forgotten that. And so I put myself on a mission to do just that. And I'm still on it. And that's what I pass along to my students, encourage them to be familiar with all of the great music they can possibly be familiar with. And then what you see in a new band score, no matter how complicated, nothing comes from nothing. And you're going to hear stuff. And you're going to, some things are going to be signatures that are borrowed from other composers. And this gives you one more thing to hang on to, and maybe a point of departure for study of that composer. So it begins to be cyclical afterward. But, you know, basically that's what I do. I'm on a mission still. I'm still looking for my favorite recording of Shostakovich 7. I think I have 6 of them. And it's who I am. It's a choice I've made, and I live with it.
Wow. Thank you. The next question is the terms balance and blend in ensemble music making. What do these terms mean to you?
Go ahead,
Well, okay, it'll be fairly brief. Neither one of them are definable. Balance. I mean, what are we? When you talk about balance, what are you balancing? And for what reason? I mean, are all fortes the same? If so, then we have a quick answer. Are all crescendos and all diminuendos the same? Are they architecturally the same? If they are, then we have an answer. But blend and balance depends on what it is that the music is trying to say. I have a friend at the University of Miami, Nick DeCarbo, music ed guy, just a terrific human being. But we were talking about blending, and he said I saw he was working with a high school band, and I just happened to be watching. And he said, we can all hear a beautiful flute tone. And he had one of the students make a beautiful flute tone. And he said, we can also hear a beautiful oboe sound. And this band happened to have a really great oboe. So the oboe played the same note that the flute had just played. But he said, when they play together, it becomes a flowbow. It's no longer a flute and an oboe, and it becomes a brand new sound. He had them play together. And all of a sudden, there's a whole new thing to listen to. Well, think about the possibilities that you have in your ensemble every single day of rehearsal. All those students there, the third clarinet and the first piccolo, I mean, that's a combination of sound that may become essential for you to examine if the music calls for it. But balance and blend is an undefinable idea. It is not, I'll tell you, it is not just a homogeneous sound that really doesn't say much. It just isn't. It just has a lot to be discovered inside of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually composed a 1-sentence response to this for fear that I would go on some sort of rant. So what does this mean to you? And I have written dynamic adjustments that are required to reveal orchestrational transparency and develop refinement of sound. The thing that I've always that I had to work through myself and finally figured out a way to deal with is that the conventional understanding of balance and blend aren't those things. And they seem to be goals unto themselves. There was a time early in my life that I thought balance meant you could hear all the parts. little did I know that was going to create a situation where you can possibly hear all the parts and they'll all be too loud. Then we get to the situation, well, what's blend? Blend turns into balance for most people. Okay. And for me, it has more to do with a fundamental concept of trying to combine two or more sounds to agree to work with each other. And that is the first step for me to even beginning to talk about how to play in tune. If you're not blending sounds, you don't actually have any sort of common ground to compare them to. Whereas growing up, I heard all kinds of stuff early on from experts that it was about, well, you can't even talk about intonation and you talk about characteristic sound. And I always thought, but the intonation is math. And so you got to talk about it at some point. And there are lots of good characteristic sounds that can be 6 cents flat in that chord and it's going to sound like crap. And so I just kind of adopted my mentor, Richard Strange's lifelong obsession with this and have passed that along to my students. And what I know is that I can go in and do somebody's all-state band or intercollegiate band or something and just do what I do, ask them to play 2 dynamics softer than printed on their page, and try to listen to more parts in the room.
I was particularly excited about this question because having heard and admired your ensembles for my whole life, I was reminded of an interview that I heard read with Valery Gergiev when he became resident conductor of the London Symphony. And the interviewer asked him, "Aren't you excited to get to conduct the London Symphony with their legendary balance?" And he said, "I of course am, and I can't wait to hear their legendary out of balance as well." And he wanted to do some things with Shostakovich and Stravinsky that the Londoners maybe hadn't heard before, and the Granger recording with the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, where the double reeds and the bass saxophone would get a 3rd division rating at District Festival, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the next couple may be a little shorter, maybe not. What is your go-to score or recording for inspiration? We talked about getting, going to the great music of the world and staying inspired. It's so important. If you can narrow it down to 10, what are the recordings and scores that inspire you every time you get a chance to come back to them, and that some of us here may go seek out immediately after this for our own growth?
The moment in a score that stands out to me as being unbelievably inspiring was loaned to me by my colleague, Tom Sleeper. He has a score, a facsimile of Mahler 2, given to him by the guy, I can't remember his name, the guy that does all the Mahler 2, or used to anyway, work with all the orchestras. And Tom loaned me that score. And I had the opportunity to go through it. And there are many, many, many instances of inspiration in that score in terms of beauty and in terms of frightening, just death-defying action in the music. But there's one of tranquil beauty that transcends anything I've ever heard, and it's the moment that the chorus enters after about an hour of the orchestra playing, just before Ehrlich. And in the score, and you got to remember that this score had offstage parts, it had things that had never been done before. There are many, many things to talk about there, but at the instant that the chorus enters, and there are many hundreds of members of the chorus, Mahler wrote 4 P's, pianissimo. But that's not, if you had it, if it was engraved on a today's manuscript, it'd say 4 Ps. But in Mahler's hand, it was P, very, very light. Second P was darker. The third P was darker. And the fourth one was if his hand was just writing piano. How soft did he want that? And why did he want it that soft? Takes my breath away just looking at that music in my mind and hearing it in my mind. That is enough. I mean, there are many, many, many others, but that one, to me, proves that this art is so personal and deeply ingrained in who we are. And that's also my belief that in spite of this disease we're dealing with right now, if there's greatness in music and if there's greatness in art, it will be heard again. And I believe it with all I have. And that helps me get through these tough times, actually.
That's beautiful.
Done.
I think that, you know, just in practical terms, my go-to score or recording is directly proportional to the one that's in front of me. And, and which one of the, you know, 4 to 8 scores that I'm juggling and preparing at any one time. So I kind of took that on more as a practical issue. But I think going back to what I was talking about, being a voracious consumer of art music, this kind of takes care of itself, because unless I'm listening to colleagues' posted recordings or published recordings of pieces that I may be interested in programming myself, or I'm doing a new piece that I'm not familiar with and I'd like to hear how other people have approached these particular challenges before I get too committed. But I think it just kind of comes down to, if you're in a position to be able to list inspiring moments in the music, you know, you're already there. You just have to find more of them. And hopefully from different sources, from different voices. And, you know, like I said, I'm a hobbyist, and I'm in the last couple of years, I've been looking for composers that I'd barely heard about. But I'm coming to realize, with all the new wonderful recordings of non-standard repertory, that I'm listening to Szymanowski symphonies and things. And I'm finding beauty in those things. I'm even finding beauty in my casual listening music. I'm a longtime jazz lover, and I can still be brought to tears by the sound of Miles Davis playing Stella by Starlight with Bill Evans. And I just remain open. I want to be inspired all the time. And so, you know, I think I've made some choices that have made it easier for me. It's just, I'm going to just kind of choose which one I want to be inspired by. Because I will not have enough time between now and whenever I am laid to rest to actually revisit all of those things, because I have too many specimens.
Wonderful. Would you each share an experience with a composer or a score, or both?
I'll follow you, sir.
Okay. Well, this is ironic because you've already stepped all over my act here, because my big come to Jesus moment came when I was it was kind of late on, and Jim will be able to help me with this, I guess. I don't remember. It must have been near the end of my time at Kentucky, but I did Child's Garden of Dreams of Mislanka pretty much out of the chute at Tim's advice, because that changed his life at Washington, and attached the shock paddles to what little program he had at that point. I did the Fourth Symphony, And that was very successful. And so some point down the road, I decided that I was going to mount a performance or die trying of the Third Symphony. And I was maybe one of the two handfuls of people that were actually listening to Gary's premiere recording. And I had to talk Tim Salzman kind of down from the trees a little bit about it. And so long story short, we ended up taking his wind ensemble up into Western Canada and over to Montana. And we had the Third Symphony in the folder. And the experience the students had and the transformative experience that I witnessed with those students in that piece with him made it kind of mandatory to try to provide that for my students at Kentucky, who by that time had worked so hard, wanting absolutely nothing in return except for acknowledgement that they were doing great. And so there we are. And I think here, I'm going to engineer this. I scheduled it carefully. It's right at the end of the year. Group sounds great. We're way beyond worrying about that kind of stuff. And then he showed up on some world tour that he had booked himself on that was going to end up with a new symphony premiere in Carnegie Hall. And he was absolutely exhausted. So we ran through the first two movements for him. And I said, do you have any comments? And he just said, well, Rick, I'm really disappointed. And I went, because I thought, man, I had everything lined up and squared, and all he needed to do was put those big mitts out into that group and talk to them and inspire them, and they were going to go like a house ablaze. He said, no, but you know, what's missing? He said, well, what I want from you is for you to tell me what you think of the piece. And I kind of went, because I had purposely not crossed all those T's and dotted all the I's, because I didn't want to have, mark that like a dog with a tree. It's not mine, it's his. And I still feel that way when I approach a new piece with a living composer. And so once I understood that, everything was fine. And it was a great experience and all that. But I learned, my big epiphany was never do that again. Come with decisions made and be prepared to alter them as the composer requests. And so, yeah, that would be my big story. And the other story about that, of course, is that I believe we were still reading Gary's parts at that point. It was still early enough in the process. But you know what? I did the Third Symphony at FSU too. It's been a while since we've been back to it. I have to wait and see which trombone player I want to commit an assassination on and to get through the end.
And say, do the euphonium players still speak to you after
That's right.
And I'm glad you brought those parts back up, because Matthew engraved those things, 5 years ago, 6 years?
Yeah, I think
it was 20 years.
I think that we enjoyed those are parts at FSU, but we were too early in the game. And so we were going with the documentary evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it was 20 years that you rented Symphony 3 and you got those parts, and you're so underselling the calligraphy. The calligraphy is beautiful. It's unbelievable. You did that by pencil for an hour-long symphony. That's the truth.
No, I still love those kids for reading those parts, because that was done under duress, as you've heard. And I had the joy of seeing Maslanka's absolutely Mozartian manuscript in the score, and so it was a lot easier for me.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Green, are you going to tell the story about collecting the movement from the snow in the Yukon post office?
No. But Rick, if
that could be the sequel.
You should do that again. I doubt that you will, but if it becomes part of your thing at Florida State before you leave there, just send me a text or something, will you? I'll come up. I need to come up anyway. I need to come up see you when this.
Oh, that'd be great.
I'd love it. Well, I thought about this when you wrote the note, Dan, and I think the one that I'd like to share with everybody is there are many, of course, but Michael Colgrass was one person that I loved to work with. He was great. He was like a magician. He would be on one side of the band, and before you knew it, he like transformed himself to the other side. I don't know how he did it, but we premiered Urban Requiem. I think you will remember that, Dan, without any problem. But we got the score, and it was difficult to read because Michael's writing was not as clear as others that I had gotten. I learned to read it, and I might just as an aside really quick say I got one of Michael's scores later that was engraved, and I couldn't read the engraved score because I was so used to his handwriting. That's how I just knew who he was and what he wanted. But we were in rehearsal with Michael, and this is after 2 or 3 days of really intense trying to get things done. You may not know this, you guys, but it's for 4 saxophones and wind ensemble. And I'm rehearsing with the group and conducting, and all of a sudden, nothing on the page is what I have on my score. I stopped and I said, I don't think I'm lost, but maybe I am. What's going on? And Michael looked at me and said, oh no, we got together last evening and we changed all this and forgot to tell you about it. I said, well, thank you very much. It'd be nice if you'd bring me along with you on your next journey with these guys. So that's something that I thought I would share. It's a different kind of thing, but Michael Colgrass was a great composer, a great poet, and a great human being. Loved him. Funny and fun guy.
I'm sure you guys feel it even more strongly than I am. I still can't quite come to grips that we've lost both of them.
Yeah.
We don't have David or Michael anymore. Wonder if there'll ever be anybody like either one. Not like them, I suppose. There'll be other greats.
There are. They're there now.
That's true, but the beauty of composition as an art form is that it's kind of uniformly individual in expression.
Yeah.
While you can kind of clump them together in style periods, that's getting more and more impossible now. And so we have really pretty extraordinary scores coming from all kinds of directions and all kinds of different humans.
Yeah. And
it's great, but we always miss the ones that we lose. And this is going to leave a mark for sure.
Yeah. If anyone with us today has not seen them on Michael Colgrass's website, there's a letter correspondence between a young David Maslanka trying to find his way in the world, and he wrote to Michael Colgrass for advice that Michael posted on his website. And there's a video there where he describes that experience too, getting to know David and their friendship throughout those years. So last question, just a few minutes left remaining. This seems to have worked out pretty darn well, and it's kind of the free-for-all question. I grinned, I suppose, while I typed it too, and I imagined what you might share with all of us. The last question, everybody, is what is this job? ?
Yeah, okay. So I've been telling people for many years, because this is how I really feel about this. Most of us that get into college band directing have to parry away these notions that somehow we're in the ivory tower and we have every advantage, and the poor people that are teaching in the public and private school sector are doing the real work, and we're, reaping the profits. I have never felt that I was profiting on that level in that way. And as I continued to work with friends middle school bands and high school bands and district honor bands and across the bandwidth of everything, it's become more and more clear to me that we are all of us doing essentially the same job. And I humorously refer to it as breaking rocks. And the facts are, I believe that I'm going, regardless of whether I'm talking to the wind orchestra at FSU, who invariably have somebody who's already played extra with the New York Philharmonic or the Cleveland Orchestra or something. I'm going from there into every other environment that I've been called to. And I realize I'm talking about the same things. I'm talking about the same issues. I'm talking to 8th graders about phrasing, to 12th graders about attention to the sounds around them and expanding their sphere. And so I think what we're talking about is the difference, getting back to the breaking rocks thing, is that the difference is that somebody who is teaching 6th graders or 7th graders or something are probably trying to start with one rock and break it in half and then start breaking that in half and bonking away at it until you got something that's more recognizable as a form that you can work with. And the difference is, of course, that, you know, in the work that I do and that Gary does and has done his whole life, regardless of this level, is, I'm sure you'll probably agree with me, it's kind of the same job. The great thing that is the great equalizer is the repertoire, the demands of the repertoire, the conceptual depth of the piece that we're talking about. And that's what adjusts for size. So bonk, 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 breaking rocks, making, you know, smaller rocks, making pebbles into sand. And then people like Gary and I, in the jobs that we have had the pleasures of doing on the backside of our career, is we're taking that sand and we're trying to smash it into diamonds. But we're still talking about the same issues. And so long ago, I tried to begin blowing up this myth that somehow all of us are smoking pipes and wearing turtlenecks and reading poetry all the time. I just have not found that to be true or relevant. And so that's kind of where I am on that. And I'm going to stick with it until I've proven to myself I'm wrong. But I think it's true.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up. I would be remiss if I don't, just a quick prelude to this. It has been, I'll say this now, it's been great to be with you, Dan, and all the people, but it's really great to be with Rick. I haven't seen him in a while. He's my friend from 400 years ago.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
Yeah, and to hear him talk that's inspiring to me, and I appreciate it. For me, this thing has been, somebody asked me what my dream was through my life, and I tell them I could never have dreamed my life. I would not have known what to dream. When I was a high school band director in Weiser, Idaho, elementary school, a vocal teacher in Mountain Home, Idaho, I never would have known that I could possibly ever know anything about David Maslenka or anyone else. But I've been given those things all my life. When I was a high school band director in Caldwell, Idaho, I played in an orchestra, and we had a young cellist from New York City came and played with our orchestra. It was Yo-Yo Ma when he was 19. And he changed everything about what I would hear. I mean, I was with him every day for a week. But I didn't know at that point in time what that meant, but I do now because it just grew and grew and grew. So I lived a blessed life, and I was a band director, and I loved it. So for me, it was just a great honor to be able to do what I did while I did it. That's what it is for me.
Well, you know I love you.
I do know that. Yep.
Well, we love you both. And, you know, Jim and I we have to admit we had a few moments there where we thought, how beautiful is this that we're going to get to have these men that have had such an influence on our lives together here today and share. And when I wrote the "what is this job" question, it was it was another world. It was probably last month, and
Yeah.
we were all going to have to continue to work and refine and define in our new realities here in the next few weeks and months. In a lot of ways, the repertoire inspiration is going to be a bit off the table, and find ways to give to these kids and families and communities in ways that that we can as we get through this. Someone said to me today that we might need to be prepared for this till the end of next semester, and I just about fell on the ground. I can't. We're all trying to come to grips with this, but it will pass, and this repertoire will sustain. I believe, as you said, and this is.
It will.
Some people have worried that maybe this is going to bring forward the digital future, and people are going to like this new reality more than in person. That has not been my experience with the people I've been talking to. We've been pining to be able to get back together. I hope that's the case. But Jim, jump in anytime you want. Professor Clary, Professor Green, we love you. We can't thank you enough for not just today, but for inspiring us for as long as I can remember. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you so much.
Bet.
Yeah, I've got one more thing to add. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Edward Asmus at the University of Utah for a little while. I was there with him for 4. We were there together for 4 years, and there have always been existential threats to our profession, and struggles to try to achieve some sense of feeling like the process at all is valued. And he looked at me and said, Rick, they've been trying to kill us since the 30s. And we haven't even slowed down.
Yeah.
So
That sounds like Asmus.
That's him.
Yeah. I said, don't worry about this. We're going to get past this. We're going to get past the next one. They've fired every bullet at us, and none of them are going to take us down. And that's kind of how I think about this. We're not going to take the desire of those kids that are in our tutelage from telling them they're not going to be able to do this anymore. This is something we have to wait out and let science help us with.
Yeah.
And then we need to be smarter going forward. But you know what? This isn't going to stop us either.
That's right.
Beautiful. Perfect way to transition there. Thanks again to you both.
Thank you, Dan.
Professor Feuderer is here. I think I saw her. And we are going to transition into flute. I am posting right now, everyone, a link to the band's website where Professor Feuderer has linked handout materials for her presentation.